Assalamu alaikum and welcome to About Islam. I am your host, Layla Abdullah Poulos. Well, it has been some night. Election Day 2020 has been, I think, even more dramatic than some of the other elections. I kind of feel like I am back in 2000. Okay, so I need someone to kind of talk me through all of this stuff. So the person who has joined me is attorney Namira Islam, co-founder of the Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative and current board member. Assalamu alaikum, Namira. How are you?
Walaikum salam. I'm actually doing pretty well this morning, going off 3 hours of sleep for election night,
So
but
you
it's
stayed
really
up
great to
late.
join you.
You stayed up
Oh
late.
yeah. I was up probably till about 4:30 in the morning. And then woke up at about 7:30 and then checked my phone immediately. And then did an interview with a radio show hosted by Muslims in South Africa this morning. So it was just it's definitely I'm feeling that election night energy because clearly I'm working off of very little sleep.
Well, election night is always very dramatic. I went to bed around midnight. I gave up. I said, you know what? It causes a lot of anxiety. I think that oftentimes, as someone who actually participates in the voting process, you feel vested in the results. So you're watching and everything like that. And some years it's more contentious than others. I mean, the last presidential election, we pretty much knew early on who
Uh-huh.
would that who won. But this one is a hotly contested year. I kind of feel like it's 2000 again.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely thinking about how unprecedented this year is because it's like not only is it this tough election, it's happening in a pandemic. And so all these voting structures are new and the infrastructure hasn't been built. So it's happening for the first time. And on top of that, it's this race that, the president, the current sitting president is put so much doubt and uncertainty about certain procedures as well. So it's just like layer upon layer upon layer, which I don't blame anyone for just deciding to call it a night last night and going and getting some rest.
Now I'm in New York, so it's pretty much a done deal with New York. I still voted. I knew that it would be really hard for Trump to get New York. For a Republican to
Of
get New
course.
York, despite the
Right.
fact New York is very dotted with red. It's very dotted
Right.
with red,
Right.
but
Mm-hmm.
it's the cities: Albany, Syracuse, Buffalo, and New York City. If the Democrats get that, that's it. Forget it. And it happens consistently. But you're in a state that, what's going on over there, girl?
Michigan has been, I mean, I honestly have been having fun, but I think it's because of a few things. So I would say that one, it's like, so my first election that I voted in was President Obama's first term. So at the time I was in Ann Arbor and it was just this resounding, people pouring to the streets and all of that. And so going into these elections where it's like, oh, we're a purple state. With last time Trump taking it over Clinton, it's been this very interesting dynamic where certain parts of the state are pretty reliable, just like in New York, just like in Oregon and certain other states that always go blue, where we see like Ann Arbor and Detroit, Lansing, Flint. These have historically always gone blue, so you kind of see it, but then you're wondering about the rest of the state. So last week, my husband and I, because of the pandemic, we never got to go on a honeymoon and we decided to go up north. So this is such a Michigan thing to do, but we always use the palm of our hand to indicate the map, right, of the lower peninsula. So Detroit's about there, like we're in this lower region. And we went all the way up to like the pinky of the lower peninsula. So this has historically been a very red part, it's very rural, lots of farmland, very much Trump country. And while we were driving up around up there, we noticed like here and there a huge Biden sign. And so it was a surprise for us. We were like, whoa, look at that. We expected it to be all Trump country. There were plenty of signs that were like, vote this election, vote against socialism, all this very intense rhetoric, huge signs put up. And then we'd be driving through and all of a sudden there's a huge Biden sign. Here's another huge Biden sign. So I was finding that really interesting and wondering how that was going to play out. And so as we're looking at the results coming in, there's this shift that's been happening. So 2016 was one of the first elections in about 40 something years that, for example, Oakland County, which is where I grew up, very suburban, very white, now becoming more Asian, was carried by Republicans. And this last election, a Democrat won. And so there's been these interesting shifts of like spaces that are not big cities that have been going blue. So I was wondering what was going to happen this time. And as a battleground state, I mean, the phone calls, the texts, right? Like it's been non-stop. But I think for me, the cincher was last night. I saw the tallies for the in-person voting versus the mail-in voting. And I knew as a state that's been dealing with all kinds of tension around COVID precautions, the plot to kidnap our governor, the protests in the state capitol, I had a feeling that people who are voting through the mail were probably more likely supportive of social distancing, probably Biden voters. So the numbers last night, 2 to 2.5 million votes in person, which of course were not all for Trump, 3.26 million absentee ballots for the mail-in process. So just seeing that alone, I was like, Michigan's looking very red right now, but I have a good feeling. So let's wait to see what happens when we get these ballots.
I saw reports that that Democrats are feeling a little bit like, don't give up Michigan yet type of thing.
Exactly. I was like, don't give up on us. So that was a really cool stat.
But that's what brings me back to 2000s, okay? Because that was the thing. It boiled down to absentee ballots, okay?
Mm-hmm.
The whole contest in Florida and whether or not to count the votes. I'm waiting. Trump already declared an early victory, okay?
Right.
That's step one. Step two is to get them to stop counting the votes.
Right.
Pushed it.
It makes plenty of, yeah. I remember hearing about some at the time. So at the time I was in 8th grade, and I remember it's, just starting to learn about the civic process, and all of a sudden there's this historic election happening. It's going to the Supreme Court. And at the time, like looking back on it now, I'm just very much wondering about like what other procedures, what other processes were there, where were corners cut, right? And the whole election recount, all I remember is Gore refusing to allow it versus Biden last night. That also gave me a lot of kind of confidence where he came out. He's like, have faith. We're still in this. And given the rhetoric on Twitter, it was really great to see that.
And I am, I'm a bit older than you. Okay. So that was not my first presidential election. And Gore, Biden has the same attitude that Gore has. Okay.
Oh, okay. Good to know.
I think Trump very much is. I think that if it's going to come down to trying to suppress votes, one party has been particularly adept at doing that. That's what's concerning to me. That's what's concerning to me, is that absentee ballots are always vulnerable. Okay, and mail and there has been an increase. I mean, New York State, the way registration and everything, it took a dramatic shift. And even like I filled out an absentee ballot, I ended up dropping it off because I'm the only one in my family that got one. New York State allowed you to do it because of COVID. And I'm the only one that got, you were able to mail in an absentee ballot. And you could even like, they mail you the absentee ballot and you could just drop it off. So you didn't have to stay.
Right.
So I would do that. And so I know that those I debated because those ballots historically have been very vulnerable. People want to call Twitter and then that's it. So, no one likes a recount. And no one likes to, if they think that they're the winner, then they want to hurry up and do their victory speech and call it a day. But hopefully that's not going to happen. Hopefully what happened in 2000 is not going to happen this year. But one of the things that I find surprising is that, this is not the first presidential election that has been hotly contested and where you don't know who the winner is election night. I think we got a little spoiled with Obama, okay, in the first Trump presidency, because that's 12 years. 12 years, 3 presidential elections, the winner was clear early on. That's not something that's typical all the time in the election process. And I see it just in the morning. I went to bed, I woke up, and people seem very upset when it's just like, this is nothing new. It's nothing new in the election process for Americans to find that they do not know who's going to be the next president the next morning. I mean, Kennedy, Kennedy, there was an issue. We just mentioned 2000. So why are people not only surprised, but they seem so upset about it?
It's not as if this is ahistorical to have this kind of speculation and uncertainty. I really think where it's coming from is that some people, I guess probably I would categorize them as liberal Democrats, were, I guess, expecting a huge repudiation of Trump. They thought this would be a resounding vote to dismiss Trump and to say, this is a pushback, that this is unacceptable, this is un-American, how Trump has been. And I think not seeing that is what led to, how could it be so close, right? After all he's done, how could it be so close? Okay. Which I think is unfortunate that people had that viewpoint. I often found myself wondering last night if that was your viewpoint, if you were completely shocked. Like, I could see being a little bit sad or disappointed, but to be shocked by it, I'm like, you probably need to be getting your political education from someone else. And I say that as kindly as possible, because where are you learning about American history and about who this country is right now and who Trump's supporters are and who is backing the viewpoint that he's putting forth about America? It should not be a shocking outcome to have this race be that close.
People are stunned. And, I think that one of the mistakes, like I think there is a level of delusion among people who are stunned. But also, I think that there is an inability to really appreciate how multifaceted Trump supporters are.
Exactly.
We always tend to think of Trump supporters as the red hat MAGA people. That's one aspect of his base.
Right.
There are people all across backgrounds. And that's one of the things. It's like when someone posted so far, the demographics, more Black women are voting for Trump. More Latinos are voting for Trump. Muslims are voting for Trump.
Yeah. Yep.
And so I think it's really a matter of people just kind of seeing like this one facade of who he is and who his supporters are, when that is not the case. Okay. There are people who don't like either, who are up in the air, just like the last election. I mean, Obama was the last president where people actually voted for a president.
Exactly. Right.
So usually you don't vote for a president, okay? You can count them on your hands. Republicans voted for Reagan. Democrats people voted for John F. Kennedy.
Right.
They voted for FDR for another term. So It's just like, I don't think people appreciate that most of the time. Americans are kind of weighing their options and looking and seeing which one they like the least.
Exactly. And that ambivalence about, let me just, hold my nose and go fill out my ballot this year. Yeah.
I think that we didn't appreciate that. A lot of people do not appreciate that. And do not appreciate the fact that those really hardcore Trump supporters, they don't care about the way that he handled the COVID crisis.
No.
And they support the violence that he inflicted on protesters.
It aligns with their value system. And there was an interesting statistic about counties that have had high rates of COVID mortality rates going strongly for Trump, which just says so much about the values and what are priorities to people. Very few things that Trump has done has actually crossed the line for his most, the supporters who are going out to vote for him.
Yeah. And I mean, we tend not to look, a lot of times we tend not to look at leadership and the ramifications that leadership has. I mentioned this in another interview, the fact that when you look at Hurricane Katrina and how the administration handled that, and Hurricane Sandy and how the administration handled that, and COVID and how this administration handled that. I mean, a lot of times that is something that when people are filling in those little circles on their ballots, they tend not to think about that.
Or they just feel that it's fine, right? The way the response is done is fine. It's warranted, it's justified, right? And that's where that narrative has been, and Trump has leaned into it so strongly. I saw, it was I believe a White House press release or something that they had released where they were talking about Trump's excellent handling of the pandemic. And that's the narrative. That is the narrative. And I feel like that's,
what
goes back.
Narrative could there be?
It goes back to what you were saying about like the multifaceted Trump supporters, because it's like plenty of people you have to understand like what is their argument? That is their argument, that Trump has been so strong on this and this and this, and he's been a great president, and so re-elect him. And that's been the argument so many people are making on his side.
And not only that, I mean, one of the things that I said to someone last night, okay, I have another attorney actually here in New York, Ramiz Faruqi, and I always hit him up election night because he's like I'm into it, like he knows everything, and like I'm always like just a month before the election starts, I start talking to him about.
Oh, I love it.
And I'm like, okay, what's going on here? And so it was just like I said to him, I said, at the end of the day, whether Biden wins or Obama wins, I have I know that there'll still be Black people getting killed by police.
Exactly.
During a Biden administration. We'll still have those issues. We'll still have those social issues. So, sometimes that's the way Black voters think. It's
right.
just like neither one of them are really going to solve anything. And I think Obama jaded people even more, Black people. Even more.
I agree. Absolutely. Absolutely. All the hope and change, and then
and Trayvon Martin.
Exactly.
Tamir Rice.
Exactly.
I mean, our babies were getting killed too. So it's like we don't really fully, for some Black voters, Trump is not egregious a candidate. Because when you look at it, some of the realities is just like, listen, he's acting like every other president acted, even the Black.
Exactly. Right. Why does this cross the line that much more? It's the same material conditions that are happening.
And historically, as voters in a society where from the very first president to this current one, issues of racism and bias and exploitation of Black bodies and oppression has existed with each and every single president. The first one owned them. The first one owned us. Okay.
Right.
The latest one is just complacent about our death, either by disease, the hands of law enforcement. So it's just like, really, when you look at the trajectory of presidencies and Black people, even Kennedy was.
It's such thing that really bothers me too about like the presidential election is this focus on the individual. And it's like the role itself, like what is the job of the president? It is to maintain and expand, the interests of this country based on something that was really laid out at the founding of this nation, which was founded on genocide of indigenous peoples and the enslavement of Africans. So given that is the role of the president, like that, I think that's also where I feel disillusioned with some of the narrative and the rhetoric around like, oh, if we elect the right person, that's not going to automatically begin to dismantle a system where this person is designed to pursue those material interests that are tied to capitalism, that are tied to racism, that are tied to all of these different ways that the country has been structured. That's the role of the president. So this idea that we could somehow elect this magical figure that, just electing this person alone is somehow going to dismantle the rest of it, I think is a fundamental misunderstanding of the role of the president for this country.
But I think that a lot of people were voting along the lines of this guy did a really bad job. And for me as a voter, this guy did a really bad job. So I kind of want him out and somebody else in. One of the things that I mentioned yesterday, because it was freezing. I know you in Michigan, so you cold too. And you
Absolutely.
got that
Absolutely.
Michigan kind of cold that cuts through your bones. And that is that I didn't see any obvious Muslims. No one was saying Assalamu alaikum to me. I know that I have friends in Tampa where that's very much a different experience. Muslims are going to the polls in Tampa, and other places. But where I live, not so much. How important is the Muslim vote? Is there such a thing as a Muslim bloc vote? Or is it a matter of we are so multifaceted in our experiences and our backgrounds that it's really not a thing that's going to happen at this point in time?
I really feel like this election, especially some of the commentary, like that disconnect has been a lot of it's been happening around this idea of these voting blocks. So the Muslim vote, the Latino vote, right? Like all these votes that are just seen as this monolithic community that, you know, there's the shock of like, oh, certain Latinos voted for Trump. And then there's the shock of certain Muslim. And so the thing that I always
How is
kind of
that a
think
shock?
about, yeah. And
Cubans
that's
are so Republican.
right. And so that's what I'm just like, there's certain trends, especially when you think about the Muslim vote. It's historically always been in alignment with more so the racial and ethnic identities aligning with certain parties than it has been really a faith-based vote. I mean, I really remember the times when there were all these debates about whether voting was even halal to do. So I guess there's still pockets of that happening. I feel like it was more prevalent before, but clearly there's still pockets. So that's like one level of this idea of like the Muslim vote. Like, is it even, you know, what are the ethics of voting as a Muslim, right? There's this level. And then when it comes to this demographic level, I think what people are trying to say is basically flattening, you know, Muslim ethnic and racial diversity into just saying, oh, these are people of color, right? It's that like the whole generalization, turning a faith group into a racial group. That is what people are trying to shortcut it as, to say the Muslim vote. And so it's like looking at the trends over the last, you know, 20 years in particular, like Bush v. Gore, right? You had you know, South Asians, Middle Eastern Muslims, just hardcore support Bush and really think about, you know, family values, the party of family values and, you know, fiscal conservative kind of values. And it was just this almost, oh, we have to align with Republicans, obviously. Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, you have, you know, this African-American Muslim vote that is aligning more with Democrats, which is reflecting historical alignments. And so I feel like when people are saying these things, I think it's this attempt to be like, oh, the Muslim ban, and, you know, of course there's a Muslim vote that is, you know, consolidated, united around Trump. I do think Muslims, like every other, you know, voter who is in swing states, obviously have a role to play in the election, but I don't think it's this exceptional block given just the population and relative to the overall population in the country. But at the same time, like, when it comes to voting, we should be prioritizing every single person having access to the ballot. And in that sense, prioritizing the fact that, yeah, we want to make sure Muslims and people from different backgrounds who are impacted by policies this administration has issued, that they have representation at the polls. And so in that sense, I get, you know, let's make sure Muslims are voting, but also let's make sure that there's an educated voting bloc that also isn't being pressured to vote just because it's the patriotic American thing to do, and you all are less American, so therefore you have to go vote. There's sometimes weird rhetoric where letting Muslims who abstain for moral reasons from the vote should not be seen as this, how dare you, you are so unpatriotic, you can't even be here, right? And so that's where I see some of that rhetoric coming out, where I'm like, yeah, the Muslim vote matters because every vote matters.
But it's pushback because you have this whole idea of an increased sense of moral superiority and piety because you don't vote. And I think that that's one of the conversations that needs to be said, not around election years. We need to constantly like try to make a shift.
Yes.
In the way that we each side looks at it, and the fact that I'm not comfortable with voting, that's fine. You can not be comfortable with voting. I am comfortable with voting, and I feel like it's duty to vote. But on top of that, is just like what's happening is this, like when you see Muslims who are saying, I don't vote because of my soul and my spirit, and you're making a political statement.
That is a political statement, 100%.
Yourself in the political process, but by standing there and saying this stuff, you're making a political statement. Okay.
And it just is such a shallow understanding too of how change works, right? Where it's like and sometimes you hear people say where they're like, you know, we're making dua, you know, we should be prioritizing making dua for political change. I'm like, yes, but isn't one of the answers to that dua the organizing and the activism that is happening? Isn't that part of that process? What are you making dua for? That something will just automatically crumble, right, without any agitation or political organizing?
I wonder how many Muslims, including, because Black Muslims, there are Black Muslims that feel this way. There are African American Muslims that feel this way for different reasons. I'm just wondering if it went back to you can't vote. You have no political voice at all. You have no choice but to sit back and let us do whatever it is we want to do to you if people would still have that same view. I'm just coming from an aspect of I know how hard my ancestors had to work to be able to still fight to get their vote from being suppressed, even like today. But it's just like what would happen is just like, no, not only non-Muslim white men,
right.
Christian white men are allowed to vote. The rest of you cannot vote.
I think it would agitate, absolutely. It would agitate people in a way that they're not feeling right now.
Yeah.
And that's part of it. I mean, especially thinking about, why do I vote? I mean, there's so many people who are disenfranchised right now from the vote. And given the history of how I'm even eligible to vote and can access the polls, how could I not vote? And at the end of the day, it's just one piece of larger strategy when it comes to social change. It is not the end all be all, which some organizers talk about. Electoral organizing is not the only form of political organizing, but it is one important part of it. And so I feel like it can be so short-sighted sometimes to be like, it doesn't matter. It's like there are very key issues that it does matter. Some things it doesn't, you're right. Like there's certain things around foreign policy, endless wars, right? Around policing and Black lives in this country that you're not going to see as big of a shift. But in other ways, there are certain things that very much differ between the two parties. And I feel like any aspect that gives us a more favorable climate to be continuously pushing for change, which should be happening regardless of who's in office, is still something that we should be striving for.
We'll have to give pushback to Biden if he wins too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, Muslim Arc, we were founded during the Obama administration. And so this idea that organizing somehow only should be happening when there's opposition, and it doesn't make sense. It has to just be happening all the time. I've been comparing elections this year to dental cleanings, where I'm like, you need to go get your teeth cleaned, but you also need to be brushing your teeth every single day and recognizing that we have cavities and we've got root canals that we need. And that work needs to happen regardless of whether or not you got your 6-month dental cleaning. Voting is about the health of the democracy. I mean, if we are focusing on voting, it is just one aspect about the health of our democracy, just like a dental cleaning and making sure you're taking care of your teeth is a part of health for the overall body. So it is very vital to be thinking about how healthy is our democracy and what am I doing to be participating in that process.
Okay. So now for the American people who may be looking at another 4 years of Trump, okay? And maybe feeling not only deflated, but just like totally despondent. The idea, how do we cope? What can we look forward to? And with a potential
That's
Trump
a great question. Yeah, with his first term, to me, it reminded me of basically a system of white supremacy on steroids. So it's like the system's there, right? It's still there, but it's on steroids. And so I think some of the things that he's been accomplishing in his first term, because I think what people focus on is his clownish kind of language or his behavior, but he's surrounded by people who are very savvy at what they're doing and have plans that are decades in the making that they're implementing. I think the strongest area that we've seen that is immigration, right? Where he's got Stephen Miller and all these people who are working off the Tanton papers, structuring things that they've been working on for decades. I think immigration is one area where a second term would completely continue that robust, reordering of what it means to be an immigrant, who is allowed to become an immigrant to this country, what rights do immigrants have, seeking asylum at the border, right? All of these different things. And, that has a very clear intersection with jails and prisons. So this idea of caging human beings, it's not just something that is immigrant, right? it's happening through different facets. Mass incarceration domestically is also the caging of human beings. And seeing the private prison industry, prison labor, all of these things escalating, that's something that especially tying this kind of element of immigration, mass incarceration, policing, with the courts. Because traditionally, especially looking back at some of the Supreme Court history, as well as local courts and state courts, there's been some progressive strides there with previous justices on the court that has been completely eroded over the last 40 years, especially. And so this administration, for the first time, there are no vacancies for the federal court circuit. They have all been filled. And currently, this administration has been responsible for a significant percentage of those vacancies being filled. So you are seeing, you know, all these hype, the fear mongering and court packing. Democrats will do court packing. It's been happening under this administration. They have been packing the courts, and a lot of these are lifetime appointments from people who are not even that qualified to become judges. And so that is what a second term, you know, the also really focusing on using the court system, using legislation to continue gerrymandering and redistricting and redrawing the maps, and also continuing to limit access to the vote. These are all things that they've been running full steam ahead for the last 4 years, and I can see them continuing to just ensure that this is enshrined and this is just the new way of doing things.
Okay. Well, I'm looking at my phone. And so now the first headline that comes up is U.S. election 2020 live. Democrats say results indicate we're on a clear path to victory.
Mm-hmm.
There's oh my God, there's always this back and forth. Okay. When you have these contested elections, everyone swears up and down that they're going to win.
Of course.
I am the person that's on social media that's checking this, because this is like you don't have a choice. You Google and you see it. Okay.
You're getting alerts on your phone. Go check out the results. I saw that from Google this morning.
I want to go check out Aunt Sally or Aunt Samaya on Facebook, and it's like all this stuff. So social media, you know, you have just like this influx of contradictory statements of victory and how's going to win and who's going to win what state. Election night, you know, those states were turning blue, pink, red, pink. You know, that's why I went to bed. I was just like, forget it. I was a little interested when I saw Pennsylvania blue, because I was like, oh wait, just got interested.
What's happening? Yeah.
And then when I saw Texas blue, oh, that kept me.
Oh my gosh, yeah. For a little bit, it was blue.
Because I was just like, wait a second, he got Texas and Pennsylvania. Oh, he won, right? And then I was like, okay, good night. I can't take it. It turned red, and I was like, good night, people. So even now, we're going to, until it's just determined who will be the next president, when all the votes are counted, hopefully no one will suppress those counts. And what do we do until then? How do we maintain some level of balance and equilibrium and not getting too stressed out, not feeling too defeated, and not feeling too hopeless?
Yeah, I love that question, because I think I'm seeing so much of it, right? That feeling of just, oh my gosh, I'm wrapped up in this, and I'm feeling my emotions are all over the place, and I'm struggling to cope, and that's really real. I think the main things that I would tell people is, one, this is what, especially the media and the structure that's around this is what they want. Like, the more hits, the more clicks, the more tweets, the more engagement, the more play by play, minute by minute, stuck to your screen. This is by design. And I understand where people are feeling the need to know the information, but I also think that there's this need to have closure, right? What is going to happen? We need closure right away. When really it's like thinking and recentering ourselves in the principles that we have, which is, one, count every vote. That is the principle. So if that takes until Friday, which some states do accept ballots until Friday, let's prioritize that. Let's put our values there, just recenter that, reground it, to be like, we're just going to count every vote.
And isn't it?
That's all this is. We're going to count every vote,
right? There's still the military vote.
Exactly. That's usually what's impacted. So when we're saying we're going to throw these out or discount them, or who cares, right? It's a lot of military service members who are sending in their ballots. Are we not going to count that? So count every vote. Let's do this right, not just rush to the wrong conclusion, right? So I feel like there's that. The second thing is also just around this feeling of control. I feel like especially for Muslims, we're not in control. None of us are in control. This is something that's bigger than us. This is something that we ourselves, if something is meant to happen, if it is Allah's will, we're not going to just change it. Regardless of what we do, it's going to happen. And I think there's something to be said for our intentions in this moment, for making sure that we are doing things for the intention. We are obviously working for the impact of it, but we will be rewarded even for the intention. So it's like that hadith, right? About if the day of judgment was tomorrow and you had a sapling in your hand, plant the sapling, regardless of what the outcome is. And so for us, I think in this moment, especially, it's like we are continuing to strive for justice, for continuing to strive for equity in our communities and society, and for having, you know, prophetic models of living beautiful lives in our modern world, and bringing that about and creating change that is positive in our spaces, that is embracing and accepting of humanity, and making sure that we're doing this work and making that intention to be doing this work regardless of what is happening, regardless of the turmoil and other things that are happening around us. And I think if we are able to reground ourselves, resiliency practices, being able to talk to other people who have lived through turmoil, especially around elections. We know that there's so many people who have unfortunately lived through this trauma and been resilient throughout it and learn these lessons. So why not use this time to connect with people, to share these stories, to learn about these histories, and about these experiences, that what did you do, right? When this was happening, what did you do? How did you cope, right? What ended up happening? And being able to use this time to really reflect and connect with people. I think especially with the media, it's designed to be so hyper individual, to have people bickering with one another, to be spending so much more time with strangers, right, than even with people that you know and that you can connect with. So just to reorient yourself, and align yourself with your own values instead of being reactive to what is being prescribed to you to do.
Yeah. So keep scrolling.
I actually told people, I was like, okay, there's doom scrolling, right? Where it's just like endless scrolling, and then doom tweeting, where it's the sense of like impending doom and people are just like tweeting us because they can. But is that really going to help you, right? At the end of the day. And so it's like divert your attention somewhere else if needed, right? If it's helpful, give yourself like a specific time period. A Sapelo Square and Muslim Wellness Foundation has like an election toolkit too, thinking about mental health and the impact, and ways to cope. So this is such a real thing, but it's not just this given that we just have to bear, you know, grin and bear it kind of approach. There are things that we can do to really focus on our health and our well-being through this period.
And Ken, one final question. Can we feel optimistic that we will continue as Muslims, non-Muslims, people of color, those people who face issues of oppression? Can we feel optimistic that even with a Trump administration, we can still resist and make inroads and push the needle forward?
I think there's always hope. I feel like despite the hardest things that people have gone through, there is always hope. I feel like part of it, some people, we are going to lose people, right? I feel like this COVID pandemic has shown that, this idea that, well, nothing changes, it's all the same. And it's like, some people don't make it. That's just part of it. Some people are resilient and are able to make it through, but other people, because of how the system operates, will not make it. And that's this real sober kind of reality, and it causes so much pain. And I feel like that does cause a lot of pessimism and grief, which is real. And I think being able to approach the healing needed around trauma is so important. But part of it is like, these actions are such human actions, and to be able to keep humanity intact and not let the system wipe that out of us, it's such a beautiful thing, right? And so how can we not have hope when people are seizing joy in these moments? People are still smiling and laughing and telling stories and having babies and spending time with grandparents and relatives and all these different
anniversary.
Yeah, celebrating wedding anniversaries and going on honeymoons, right? Like people are still doing these things. There's music and there's art and people are growing plants and flowers, right? Like how can we not have hope when we're seeing these moments? And I think that's such an important thing to recognize, that despite everything that happens, they cannot control that, right? And this opportunity for us, if we're able to make joy and seize joy for ourselves and then expand that so other people can also do that in their lives and have the resources they need for healing and resources they need to thrive, like that is, no matter if it's one person, that is hope. Like that is a reason to always maintain that hope regardless of what is happening in the world.
And we're fortunate because we do have great organizations like the Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative, Sapelo Square, the Black Muslim Psychology, Black Muslim COVID Coalition. We El Hibri. We have all these great organizations out there care to kind of help us to see that we got this, we can do this. And whether it's Biden or whether it's Trump, inshallah, we have the power and the ability to move ahead and push forward. And we should not, Allah says, do not grieve that about his mercy. Don't think that his mercy is not there. So we really need to kind of think about that along those lines too. Jazakallah, thank you so much for joining me, Namira. I know you're a very busy woman.
Well, yeah, I'm so glad we got to do this. This is, modeling that in action. So thank you so much for this moment that we got to share together today.
Thank you. And please visit the Muslim Arc website, learn more about what's going on there, visit Sapelo Square and all these other great organizations. I'll make sure to put the link there too. And step back from the results, okay?
Yes, if needed, take that break. Muslim Arc has a membership meeting that's going to be happening this Saturday. Facebook live streams, but if you're a member, you can join the Zoom channel. So there are these places that, if you need a space to connect and to really be able to process and just gather with like-minded people, there are these resources out there. So yes, don't despair, look for what's available, make those proactive little choices, whether they're small things or big things, but definitely stop the doom scrolling. Stop the doom scrolling.
Jazakallah khairam, and please join us again for another About Islam great interview, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.